Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us today for our scenarios workshop. This is an ongoing series that we conduct where we invite folks to come in and we do a review of one of our games. Typically on these, we like to run through and show you any new features that we've introduced on the Training Arcade and for that specific game. And we also run you through best practices and any other helpful tidbits that we can cover. We're going to leave some time at the end of this for questions. So please, as we're rolling through, if anything comes up that you want to ask, don't be shy, ask it in the chat and we'll be sure to do our best to get to it. We are recording this workshop and we will share it with everyone who's in attendance after the fact. Like I said, this is an ongoing series. In this case, we are going to cover scenarios, which is one of 8 games that is in the Training Arcade. This game is a bit unique in that, given that it's a branching dialogue maker, it gives a lot of horsepower to our subscribers to be able to create custom situations, custom scenarios, and take them through very specific set of training. And that training gets to branch off into a variety of ways and really gets to unearth where there might be gaps and available learning that can be conveyed to your employees. So I'm excited today. We have 2 participants that I'm going to hand the mic over to here in a second. Jack Schaefer is a product evangelist here at the game agency, and Jack is going to dive into the tool and showcase some of the new features, acclimate you to how to use the tool, and show you some of the new front-end features that we've pushed recently. Also joining us is Leanne Rode, and she is an instructional designer, a game designer, just super well suited to give us an overview. And she's going to dive a bit deep into, she's going to cover the benefits of branching dialogue games and when to be thinking about them, and also run through some specific scenarios as to how these can seem complicated, but how she's going to break it down and really showcase how to think about this, how to navigate it, and hopefully add a lot of value to you in the process. So I am going to turn it over. We're going to start with Leanne, and she's going to run you through a presentation that she has, and then we're going to cut over to Jack.
All right. So with branching narrative, you have 2 really useful functions when you choose branching dialogue as a game mechanic. You have engagement, because you're taking the player and you are asking them to imagine that they are the protagonist in your story. You're asking them to choose their responses based on how they would personally react. And also, you engage them because conversations are a natural way we solve problems in daily life. So the other really useful thing you get kind of for free with using branching dialogue as a game mechanic is relevance. When a player is playing a branching dialogue game and they're not succeeding the way that you would maybe like them to, you are able to capture that player and lead them down another path that actually teaches them how they could have responded in a better way. So because you have identified them as someone who maybe is your ideal player for your game, because if your player already knows all the best ways to respond, they might not even need to play your game. So once you've identified that you do have a learner who has this opportunity, you can really effectively teach them within the context of your larger educational content. So branching dialogue is a really great tool, but it does have a couple challenges. One of the big challenges when you're designing branching dialogue is it can end up increasing the overall scope of the project by adding a ton of writing and a ton of paths that sometimes when we start making a branching dialogue game, we think more writing necessarily means a better game. But if you're not using your content effectively and reusing your content when it makes sense to, a lot of the time you can end up with a lot of players who don't end up seeing any of that content because you had tons of branches and not enough of a linear story you were telling them. So a good branching dialogue game balances that meaningful choice with linear, more traditional storytelling to lead those players through their experiences in a way that's really meaningful to them. So this slide deck was originally developed for a client, and I took what she had done with her current design and used it to help her learn more about game design. And this is kind of where she was at with her original script. So what she was doing was she was starting off, she was asking her learner a question, giving them 4 options to respond to that question, and then giving them 4 unique responses to their response. So this is almost a branch. The player would go through here, they would choose 1 option, they would get 1 response. And if there was some meaningful choice in here, this would be just fine. But instead, after their unique response to their response to that question, she moved right on to another question that wasn't affected by this choice that they made. And now the next screen is going to look a little complicated, but I'm going to ask you to just trust me for a few minutes, as it's more natural than you would think once you get into the flow of the game design. So this is that screen. The one that I mentioned might be a little kind of scary at first, but I'm going to bring you through it. So this area here, this is what the client already had. She had a start, she had a question, and she's had 4 different ways to respond to that question. In this response, she had a way to respond that was just okay. She had a good way to respond, a best way to respond, and a bad way to respond. So the bad way to respond, what you can do here, I call it a hard failure. A hard failure will send the player right back to the start of the game. This would be an example if you're having a real conversation where maybe you said something that was maybe borderline impolite, or something that was definitely wrong, something you really don't want your learner to use in a situation. So they've selected this, you call out what they did well and what they could do to improve, and then you send them back to the start of the game. This is a really powerful message because players don't like to feel like they've failed, and they will definitely feel like they've failed if they are sent back to the start of the game to retry the entire scenario. So it's a powerful tool to use carefully. If you choose the okay outcome, this would be an example in a conversation where you maybe just misunderstood a key point. Maybe someone looked at you a little strange and you had a opportunity to clarify what you meant. And in this case, you're actually able to reuse your content. So you're able to call out what the player did well, what they could do to improve, and just send them back to their original question to reevaluate these options and try again. So once you've taken care of the okay outcome and the bad outcome, you have 2 branches that are, this is really kind of where the meat of the game comes in. You're going to have your linear path, which is the best outcome. So, and again, this is the player that maybe doesn't need to play the game, but because we're using a branching narrative, we can break the problem into several steps that at every step, we can find out if they truly understand the entire problem or if they need a little bit more reinforcement. But I don't want to get too ahead of myself. In this branch, we have a good outcome in which these might be a little similar, only this response would mean they misunderstood a key point. And that's what you would use in this conflict here to call out what happened there and to reinforce what you want them to take away from the situation. And I have another slide down here that is a little bit easier to understand from a big picture standpoint. This section here, this is what we just went over. We have the okay choice, the good choice, the best choice, and the bad choice, and they lead the player. Only these two choices lead the player forward in the game. These choices reuse your content at the start. But as you can see here, each branch of this game gives the player the opportunity to still fail in a sense. Just because you chose the best choice in the start of the game doesn't mean that in the next step you were definitely going to, for lack of a better word, win. There are still ways for this player to misstep, and that's where some of the meaningful choice comes in. And it's really it's important, because if you don't have the meaningful choice, your player is going to feel less engaged. Like in real life, in conversations, we have the opportunity to misunderstand, to connect, or to truly disconnect from the person we're talking to. And that's what you want to echo in your branching narrative game. So this is just one example of a very short experience, but what you want to take away, even if you want to do something much larger and much more branching than this, is you always want to be thinking about how to lead the player back to your main linear path. Because if they start to meander off into kind of the unknown, it can become a scope problem very quickly. So whenever you have someone branch, there's a reason to branch them off, and you want to make use of that learning opportunity as best you can. So I'm just going to sum up here. Your opportunities are your player path. So as I've said, when you branch and you have a different player path, you have the opportunity to really teach that particular learner something unique to them. And again, learning opportunities, when the player makes a bad choice, the game should respond with advice or resources instead of maybe just letting them know that they didn't select the right answer. And then again, when the player makes a good choice, you want to reinforce what they did well. And then relevance. So when you're really being smart about these branching paths, you can tailor the experience to that player and engage them at their current level of knowledge. So you've got your hard failure. That's when you return the player to the start of the game. And again, that feels very much like a fail. And if you overuse this tool, you risk disengaging the player entirely. So you want to be careful with it. Only use it when it's really necessary. You have a soft failure, so returning a player to reevaluate a question or to an earlier part of the game, which is powerful because you can reinforce what they did right and wrong. And the almost success, which allows you to capture players who are almost getting it, but just need a little bit more help to actually get there. So that's a really, really brief introduction to branching narrative, why it's really useful, and some of the trouble that you can get into. But if you're careful to use your branching tools meaningfully, I think you'll have a lot of success with the scenarios program.
Terrific. Thank you very much, Leanne.
You're welcome.
All right, cool. I'm sure there's going to be some, there will be some questions that come out of this. But Jack, I'm going to flip it over to you and ask that you share your screen and start to dive into, I think you're going to start with the front end of the games and then dive into the back end and show some features.
Great, absolutely. So again, thank you so much, Leanne, for walking us through those techniques. So now we're going to dive in to the training arcade. And I'm going to show you how you can use the training arcade as an effective tool and apply those techniques that Leanne just talked about and create a really effective and powerful scenarios games. So I'm actually just going to dive right in here. This is the front end, and we're going to start at the tutorial screen of an existing scenarios game. And I'm going to highlight some of the new features as we continue to go through the front end of this game. And so I just wanted to give you some context as to what this is and what you are building at the end of this. And so this is a finished product. And then immediately after this, we'll dive into the admin and go over all of the different components that you can utilize inside of our training arcade platform to create a game like this. So first, one of the newest features that we have is a meter. There's two different types of meters that we have, and I'll go over each of those later. But the meter serves as a visual tool by which users can see their progress and how well they're doing throughout the scenarios game. Are they answering questions correctly or incorrectly? Are they getting the appropriate score that they need to progress onwards throughout the scenario? Another new feature that we have is the history button up at the top right. And this is a button that's accessible to your users at any point during the scenarios game. And by clicking on this button, it pauses the game and they're able to see wherever they are in the story, how they arrived at their present scenario. So they can click through each one of the questions that they answered previously and see how they answer that question to then understand how they arrived at the present scenario where they are currently. And then obviously in scenarios, your decisions drive the way forward. So it really is this branching pathway that you're creating for your users. They go down all of these different avenues based on the responses that they supply to your questions. This first slide, this is just an example of a content slide where you would upload a video, such as the one I have on screen here, audio or a picture, and this is what's going to set the story for your users. This is what's going to create the actual scenario. So in this example, this is a doctor, and she's talking to the sales rep. I'm going to actually skip down to the end of this video. And so at the end of the story, the user now has an opportunity. They are presented with the content slide. Your user now has to select what is the most appropriate response for the scenario, what is going to propel them forward, what is going to keep that conversation moving with that doctor, because that's the goal is, in this particular scenario, is you want to keep that conversation open and going because you want to sell your new pharmaceutical drug. And so based on the answer that I picked, let's see. Let's select this one. So I got it wrong. It's going to bring me to another content slide. And this one, in this case, might be a little closed off. It's going to display a video where she's not as interested. And, I didn't earn as much points. So maybe she's not as open-minded as she was if I picked another answer.
And Jack, I just point out that everything that you see on the screen for the purpose of the content, the storytelling, whether it's a video, an image, or audio, and then when you move into the decision points, those decision points can be right and wrong answers, as Leanne talked about in those paths, and you can also change the settings there, and it can be, there's no right or wrong necessarily. There's options that you take, so you can decide at certain branches whether it's a branch off that isn't right or wrong necessarily, but then add that back in and have decision points be judged events later on. Also, when you're designing those decision points, you have full flexibility of being able to change the look and feel. So you can have an image in the background supporting the question. You can have videos as well. And we're going to be introducing some color themes and palettes shortly that'll give you some more control over the look and feel.
Great, thank you, Joe. Yeah, so initially Scenarios launched back in September of 2018. And we're super excited about creating a game that puts players into these realistic soft skill simulations with virtual characters and challenges. And Scenarios is optimized to make it as much of an immersive experience, as Joe was just saying, as possible. And it features a high level of customizability to meet the many different functions of our subscribers would deploy it for. And we'll go over some of these features right here, starting in the game setting. So whether you're coming back and editing an existing Scenarios game, or you're creating it for the first time, this is the screen that you'll be presented with at first. And this is where you're going to apply all of the default settings and game information for your particular Scenarios games. And so right away, there's the name, the specific URL for your game at which your users can access. Scrolling down, you can set a default timer for all of the different questions and your content that you upload. You can require a certain percentage of answers that your users need to answer correctly in order to pass the course. You can turn on a tutorial before the game. And then specifically for the Scenarios game, this is our new feature, the game meter. So you can opt in to have this on or off. And then the two different types are standard and tug of war. So the standard meter, it's a traditional score bar, and this bar will fill based on the amount of points the player earns from selecting correct responses. Second type of meter is the tug of war meter, and this starts in the middle, and it's going to fill to the left or the right towards a maximum or minimum value based on the user's choices. So in the example that we just had, we had interested on the far right side of the bar and then not interested on the far left bar. And you would set those values here at the meter max title and meter min title. And again, it serves as a visual, so the user knows how they're progressing through that particular scenario. And in that recent example, the doctor was not as interested based on the response I chose. So the bar would go towards the minimum title. And if I continue to pick answers that were correct or were better choices, it would fill towards the meter max. Another feature that we have is to turn on slide transitions. And so this is just a short animation that plays in between each slide. So that whether it's the video and then your content, just a small animation, and you can select whether to have this on or off. And then another feature we have is indicate previous answers when selected when repeating a question. So if your users selected an answer and it wasn't correct or it wasn't the best choice, and they revisit that question somewhere down along the path of this branching dialogue, they're brought back to that scenario, you can have it show whether they selected that answer previously or not, and it would be displayed in a grayed out format if you were to select yes, or you don't have to show it at all, in which case you would select no. Some more overall general information. So the Training Arcade supports user authorization. So if you want to lock this down to a specific group within your organization or secure it, you can do so via single sign-on, SSO. The Training Arcade supports that. Or you can upload an authorized player list, whether you enter those names and emails in manually, or you can upload a CSV to the Training Arcade. So if you wanted only your sales department to have access to this, then you can upload a CSV of the sales department, and only those folks would be able to access it at the URL.
Hey, Jack, do you mind if I interrupt for 1 second? I just wanted to give a time check. There's 4 minutes left. We can go over this, but if there's anyone on the call who needs to jump in 4 minutes and you have a question, please throw it into the chat right now and we'll try and address it. And if you have to go, we'll still, we'll go over and finish our presentation here and we'll make sure to send you a recording. Just wanted to let everyone know about the time.
Awesome. Thank you, Jamie. So I'm going to hit on actually the two biggest things left in terms of features. So we've actually updated theme and the styling for scenarios to be much more modern and clean. So we actually have 2 themes that you can now select from by default when you have a scenario game. The first one is overlay. And basically, this just means that your question content is overlaid on top of the image or background that you selected for your game. And then the more traditional look and feel of scenarios is split, in which the image is separate from your question content. Other than that, you can add your company logo, game title, and background, and then you save your game, and you're ready to go. So I'm going to go over to the slides tab right here. And the slide section, this is where you're going to add all of your content. So this is an existing scenarios game. So I have every single one of my info slides. I have my question slides that are available to me. And they're all going to be visually represented inside of these blue tabs. And they're labeled as such for each one of my questions that I have, or if it's an info slide, it's labeled as such. And then to go into any one of these at any time, you just click on the tab, and it's going to expand with all of the different elements needed for you to create that slide. You have your text fields where you can choose what type of slide that you want, the name of your slide, if you want to use a timer. By default, remember we used that global timer earlier, so it's going to be 60. And then you're able to upload an image or a video to here to set that scenario. And then at the bottom, you'll be able to select where this branches to. So as you create more of these info slides, as you create more of the question slides, they're going to populate inside this list, and our system will pick that up. And you can select, by default, if it just goes to the next question, or you can specifically designate which slide or which question that it goes to next to create that effective branching dialogue. And so in this instance, because this is the first info slide, I've defaulted it to the next question, which is question 2. Now, one thing I wanted to highlight here on the actual question slide, you do have the option to select multiple choice, multiple select, image match, put in a poll, or just regular text input as your assessment types. But there's also, we've updated the ability for you to choose your question layout. We recognize that, not every image or static art background that you have is going to be, left justified or right justified. And so to kind of account for that, and also the different sizes and lengths of responses that you might have in terms of your content on the training arcade, you'd be able to choose your question layout here, whether it's left justified or right. You can center your content full screen. Maybe you want a little bit more room to put your answer content into that. You don't need to focus on the visual as much. And then a modified version of full screen, which is compressed. On the question slides, you also have the ability to upload an image or an audio to accompany your content. Below that is the text fields where you can enter in your actual content for your question. So here is what is the most effective response, the default timer. And then right below that is the answer section. At the top of the answer section, you'll have a checkbox if you want to randomize your answers or not. And you would just leave that unchecked just like that. You also, if you don't randomize your answers, you have the ability to reorganize the order in which your answers are by just clicking and dragging the icon on the left, and you drag it to the position that you would like that answer to appear on. Each answer, you can put the text in each one of these text fields, and then there's a corresponding points, correct, and go to column. So if you'd like to assign a point value to the answer, you can do so here, and you can actually assign a negative point value to questions if that's a really bad response. And also, it would correspond to that tug of war meter that we were talking to earlier. In order to move the bar in that negative direction, you would want to assign a negative point value so the bar would go in that direction. You also don't have to assign points at all. If it's a neutral response, or you just don't want points associated with this, if it's no correct, there's no right or wrong necessarily, you're just telling a story and you're trying to have your user navigate through it, you can assign negative points. And then traditional point values also can be associated. The correct column, if there are correct answers, if there is a best choice answer, you can designate that here just by clicking on whichever one of the answers is correct. And then finally, in the go-to column, this is the branching column. So you can set up many different questions and slides that your user can branch off to depending on the answer they take. And again, all of your existing slides and your questions will appear here, and you just simply select which one you want to branch them off to based on that answer that they take, and it will take them there. There's even an option, if the time goes up, if they run out of time, they're not able to answer quick enough, you can select where they branch off to in that scenario too. Maybe there's a specific scenario where you need them to answer quickly and they don't fast enough, and so there's a specific scenario for that. And lastly, at the very bottom of this, there's the feedback response. So you can provide your users feedback for answering a correct choice, incorrect, and then if there's a timeout, and you can designate all of that specific feedback right here, and then upload an image to accompany it. So that in a nutshell is the training arcade for the scenarios game. I just want to be mindful. Jamie, is there any questions in the chat? Looking at the time.
No questions. And I'm sure some folks need to wrap, but maybe if you don't mind taking a minute just to share the different ways that folks can publish the games once they build them out to their audience.
Yeah, absolutely. So when you're ready to publish your game, so of course, always hit the save button up at the top right, and then you can come over to publish. You can elect to make the URL private or just publish via your URL here. And essentially, you copy this URL, or you can launch it right here. I'm going to click on it, and your game is ready to go. As soon as you saved it, all the content is inside of there. You'd start filling out your leaderboard. Your users can play it right away, just like that. The other way, we also are SCORM compliant. So if your LMS utilizes or integrates with SCORM, you can download your SCORM package here, whether it's the 2004 or 1.2 edition. And these SCORM packages contain all of the hooks necessary to pass back the scores, the percentage needed to pass, and different details like that for your game. And when you integrate it with your LMS, the games will pop up via iframe right inside of your course that you have, and you're ready to go.
Thanks, Jack. And how about just a quick view of the analytics?
Oh, actually, yes. Great. Go over to the analytics tab right here. So for any one of your games, you'd be able to select up at the top here. You can go through and navigate to any one of them. You'd click on the game, and then analytics will display for that specific game. I'm just going to leave it on this one for now, actually. So your player stats, up at the very top, there's very general stats. So how many users you have for your game that have played. Are there any new users for that day? The highest score, how many sessions, how many folks have completed that session, and then how much time are folks playing your game? What is the average session duration? And so you can see really quickly overall how your game is trending. And you can start to dive down deeper and see specific player stats. How is Lynn doing on this game? I can see all the information. Her rank is number 2. She has this high score. She's doing great. She's completed 1 session. She spent this much time. She's answered questions correctly or incorrectly, and then how many of those questions. You can add a custom date range to your report if you want. You can search for specific users. You can also search by their email, so that's a variable that we have in there. And then all of this is also exportable via CSV. You would just apply the filters that you want, and then you'd be able to export it. If you want to take an even more granular look, you'd actually be able to click on that user's name and specifically look at all of their history here within the game. And so you can see each one of their sessions, that session's data, their high score, their average session duration, and then even further, you can see their question data. How much time are they spending on each question? How many times did they attempt that question? Did they get it correct on the first, second, or third attempt? Are they learning? Are they progressing? And you can really dive in and get into the nitty-gritty. So you can get some really cool insights into, if so many people got this wrong and so many people only answered it correctly on the third attempt, maybe my question's too hard, or maybe it's not clear enough, or, why are people really struggling this? And so you can ask those questions and then start a dialogue, which is super powerful for learning. And then underneath this, very similar in fashion to what I showed you with the user question diving in there, you have this overview for all of your users or all of the questions in your game. This game has no questions currently. That's why it's not showing. I just want to be clear. And then you can dive in on each question and see what is that average time people are spending. Again, are they answering it correctly on the first attempt, second attempt, third attempt? And again, all of this is exportable. You can download this and report and fashion your report right here from the training arcade. So it's super powerful. You can start really big picture, dive into the nitty gritty, and then if folks are struggling, you can start that dialogue based on what you see here.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Looks like there is a quick chat. Let's see. Oh, okay. So Leslie is asking about what's the best way to script a game. So I'm not sure if Leanne, you want to take that, given your instructional design expertise?
Sure, yeah, I can speak to that. I would say that the best way to script the game is to ask yourself questions first that are really high level. So what is the main conflict? And then think about at the end of your game where your users are going to end up. So you kind of you set the main conflict. You think about a few different ways that things could go wrong, a way that things could go really right, and if you want to add even worse outcomes, you can, but that gives you a sort of starting point and an end point, and then you can start trying to connect them, and it can help inspire you along that way. And the other note that I would add is to create a flow chart like the one we showed earlier in this webinar, just to help you visualize the way that the paths are branching. Does that answer your question? Awesome.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. All right, guys, if there's no other questions, then I want to give a big thanks to Leanne and Jack and Joe for today. And we promise to send this recording out to everyone who joined. If you have other questions, of course, please reach out. And if you or anyone on your team needs a more specific demo, certainly let us know. Anyone who's not a current subscriber, if you go to the trainingarcade.com, there is a start your free trial button, and you could go ahead and sign up for a 14-day trial, play with the tool, build out some sample games, test them in your LMS, or load them into a course and see how that works. And, let us know if you have any questions. Thanks again for joining today.